The morning sun slowly rose over one of the most luxurious neighborhoods in Lagos, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. Along a quiet street lined with towering palm trees stood the magnificent Lawson estate. The mansion was famous throughout the city. It had sparkling fountains, marble walkways, colorful flower gardens, and expensive cars parked neatly in the driveway. People passing by often slowed down just to admire its beauty. To outsiders, it looked like a place where everyone lived happily. But behind its elegant gates, kindness was rare. Every morning before the owners of the mansion woke up, one man was already hard at work. His name was Ethan. Dressed in a faded brown shirt with several patches sewn across the sleeves, old torn trousers stained with soil, worn-out boots, and a dirty straw hat that shaded part of his face, he quietly pushed a rusty wheelbarrow through the garden. He carefully watered rows of roses, trimmed neatly shaped hedges, swept fallen leaves from the marble paths, and gently removed weeds growing around the colorful flowers. Every movement was calm and patient. He never rushed. He treated every flower as though it mattered. The other workers hardly noticed the beauty of the garden anymore. To them, it was simply another day's work. But to Ethan, every blooming flower reminded him that beauty could grow even after hardship. The security guards standing near the gate laughed whenever they saw him. "Look at old Gardner," one of them joked. "He spends more time talking to flowers than people." The second guard burst into laughter. "I think flowers are the only friends he has." The two men continued laughing as Ethan quietly walked past them carrying heavy bags of fertilizer. He heard every word, yet he said nothing. Instead, he smiled politely. The guards shook their heads. "He doesn't even know how to defend himself." Inside the mansion, the housekeepers were busy preparing breakfast while chefs hurried through the enormous kitchen. Luxury surrounded everyone. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Freshly polished floors reflected the morning light. Servants rushed from room to room carrying silver trays. Meanwhile, Ethan remained outside beneath the hot sun. He had already been working for 4 hours before anyone thought about breakfast. When the kitchen staff finally placed leftover bread and a small cup of tea on an old wooden bench behind the servants' quarters, Ethan quietly thanked them. He bowed his head before eating. To anyone watching, he looked like an ordinary poor man grateful for even the smallest meal. No one could have imagined that this humble gardener owned private jets, luxury hotels, international companies, and investments worth billions. No one knew that the man eating stale bread was actually Ethan Cole, the mysterious billionaire whose sudden disappearance had become the biggest news story in Nigeria. Just 3 months earlier, every newspaper had carried his photograph. Television stations discussed his unexpected absence every night. Financial experts wondered why the founder of Cole Group had vanished without leaving any public explanation. Some believed he had retired. Others thought he had become seriously ill. Many claimed he had secretly moved overseas. No one guessed the truth. The billionaire had willingly exchanged custom-made suits for dirty work clothes. He had traded boardrooms for flower beds. And he had chosen to disappear into the life of an ordinary gardener. Only 2 people in the entire world knew where he really was: his elderly butler, Mr. Benson, and his trusted lawyer, Michael Daniels. Both had begged him to abandon the dangerous experiment. "You don't have to do this, sir," Mr. Benson had pleaded. "People already respect you." Ethan had smiled sadly. "They respect my money. I want to know who would respect me without it." Those words stayed with him every single day. A loud car horn echoed through the compound. The front gates slowly opened. A shiny white luxury SUV rolled into the driveway. The servants immediately stood in neat lines. Everyone lowered their heads. Mrs. Patricia Lawson had returned from an early morning charity event. She stepped out wearing an elegant designer dress, sparkling jewelry, oversized sunglasses, and high heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. She was known throughout Lagos as one of the wealthiest socialites in the country. Magazines praised her expensive fashion. Television hosts admired her glamorous lifestyle. She often spoke publicly about generosity and helping the less fortunate. Yet the people working in her own home knew a completely different Patricia. She barely greeted her employees. Instead, she searched for mistakes. As she walked through the garden, her eyes landed on Ethan. She frowned. "You missed a leaf." Ethan looked down. One tiny brown leaf had fallen from a nearby tree onto the spotless pathway. "I'm sorry, ma'am." He immediately bent down and picked it up. Patricia sighed dramatically. "If I have to tell you every little thing, why am I paying you?" "Sorry, ma'am." She rolled her eyes and continued walking. One of the servants quietly whispered to another, "It was only one leaf." The other servant quickly replied, "Be careful. She'll hear you." Everyone knew better than to question Patricia Lawson. Late that morning, another expensive vehicle entered the compound. Music blasted from the speakers as a sleek sports car stopped near the entrance. Out stepped Patricia's only daughter, Vanessa Lawson. She was 24 years old, beautiful, fashionable, and adored by millions on social media. Every photo she posted attracted thousands of compliments. People admired her beauty. Few knew how cruel she could be. Vanessa removed her sunglasses and noticed Ethan trimming flowers near the fountain. She exchanged a mischievous smile with the two wealthy friends beside her. "Oh, look!" She laughed loudly. "Our favorite gardener is still alive." Her friends laughed immediately. One of them covered her nose dramatically. "Doesn't he ever wash those clothes?" "I don't think he can afford soap," another joked. The three young women burst into laughter. Ethan continued trimming the flowers without looking at them. His silence somehow amused them even more. Vanessa slowly walked closer. She deliberately stood where Ethan was working. "What are you doing?" "I'm trimming the roses, miss." She glanced at the perfectly shaped flowers. "They're ugly." Without warning, she reached out and snapped several freshly blooming roses from the bushes. The flowers Ethan had carefully nurtured for months fell onto the ground. "There," she said proudly. "Now they look better." Her friends applauded and laughed. Ethan quietly bent down and picked up every damaged flower. His hands moved gently, almost lovingly, despite the destruction. One of Vanessa's friends nudged Ethan with her expensive handbag. "Why don't you say something?" He simply replied, "I hope you have a wonderful day." For a brief second, the women looked surprised. Then Vanessa laughed even louder. "He's hopeless." As they walked away, one friend grabbed Ethan's old metal watering can. "I wonder how heavy this is." Before Ethan could respond, she deliberately tipped it over. Water splashed across the neatly arranged flower beds and soaked Ethan's already worn clothes. The women clapped and laughed as though they had just watched the funniest comedy in the world. Nearby gardeners quietly lowered their heads. Some pitied Ethan. Others were simply afraid to intervene. Ethan slowly lifted the watering can, wiped the mud from its side, and continued watering the flowers as though nothing had happened. Inside, however, he was carefully observing everything. Every insult, every act of cruelty, every laugh. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted to discover the true character of the people around him. High above the garden, hidden inside decorative security lights and cleverly disguised among the flowering vines, tiny cameras silently recorded every moment, every insult, every humiliation, every act of kindness. The recordings were securely transmitted to a private server known only to Ethan and his lawyer. This experiment had never been about exposing poverty. It was about exposing hearts. As the afternoon sun settled over the beautiful estate, Ethan stood quietly beside a bed of blooming white lilies. He looked at the magnificent mansion where wealth lived behind walls of pride. Then he glanced at the simple flowers growing beneath his hands. Flowers never cared who watered them, rich or poor, powerful or forgotten. They bloomed for anyone who cared for them with love. Ethan smiled to himself. His greatest test had only just begun. And before it was over, everyone who had laughed at the poor gardener would discover a truth so shocking that it would change their lives forever. The following morning began like every other day. Before the first rays of sunlight reached the rooftops of the Lawson estate, Ethan was already awake. His tiny room stood behind the servants' quarters, squeezed between the storage shed and the gardener's tool room. The walls were cracked, the ceiling leaked whenever it rained, and the small bed creaked every time he turned over. A single wooden chair sat beside a narrow table where he kept a worn Bible, a notebook, and an old family photograph. To everyone else, it looked like the room of a poor man struggling to survive. Only Ethan knew the truth. Hidden beneath one loose floorboard was a small metal box containing a satellite phone, a secure tablet, several encrypted flash drives, and documents that proved he was one of the richest men in Africa. Every morning, before anyone else woke up, he carefully lifted the floorboard and checked for messages. That morning, the screen displayed several missed calls from his lawyer, Michael Daniels. Another message followed. Everything is under control. The board meeting ended successfully. Profits have exceeded projections. No one suspects anything. Ethan smiled faintly before locking the device away again. For a moment, he stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The man looking back hardly resembled the billionaire who had once appeared on magazine covers. His neatly trimmed beard had grown thicker. His skin had darkened under the scorching sun. His expensive hairstyle had been replaced by messy curls, hidden beneath a faded cap. The rough work had left small cuts on his hands. Even his posture had changed. He truly looked like an ordinary gardener. Exactly as he intended. He picked up the old family photograph from the table. It showed a much younger Ethan standing beside his parents in front of a tiny wooden house. His father wore faded overalls. His mother smiled warmly despite her simple clothes. Looking at the picture brought back memories he had never forgotten. Years earlier, long before the private jets, long before luxury mansions, long before international business awards, life had been painfully different. Ethan had grown up in a poor farming village on the outskirts of Ogun State. His father worked as a gardener for wealthy families. Every day, the old man left home before sunrise carrying worn-out gardening tools over his shoulder. He planted flowers, trimmed hedges, watered gardens that never belonged to him. Although he worked harder than anyone Ethan had ever known, people rarely noticed him. Some employers never learned his name. Others spoke to him as if he were invisible. One afternoon, when Ethan was only 12 years old, he accompanied his father to one of the large estates. As they worked together, the owner's teenage son walked outside. He looked at Ethan's father with disgust. "You people belong in the dirt," the boy sneered. "My father says gardeners are nothing but poor servants." The words pierced young Ethan's heart like a knife. He expected his father to become angry. Instead, the old man calmly continued trimming the hedge. On their way home, Ethan could no longer remain silent. "Dad, why didn't you answer him?" His father smiled gently. "Because one day, son, people will judge you before they know you. They'll see your clothes before they see your heart. They'll see your job before they see your character." He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Never become like them." Those words stayed with Ethan for the rest of his life. Years later, tragedy struck. His father became seriously ill. Medical bills piled up. The family could barely afford food. Ethan left school temporarily to work several small jobs. He washed cars, carried cement at construction sites, loaded trucks in busy markets, worked long hours repairing broken fences. Some days he earned almost nothing. Other days, employers refused to pay him at all. Yet he never gave up. At night, he borrowed old business books from the local library. He studied by candlelight while everyone else slept. Slowly, opportunity found him. His first small landscaping company began with only one borrowed lawnmower and 3 customers. Within a few years, that business expanded into property maintenance. Then construction. Then real estate. Then manufacturing. Eventually, Ethan founded Cole Group. His determination transformed him from a poor gardener's son into one of the most respected businessmen in the world. But success brought a different kind of pain. He remembered the day he purchased his first luxury car. People who had ignored him suddenly wanted to become his friends. Former classmates who once mocked him began asking for favors. Distant relatives appeared from nowhere claiming they had always supported him. Businessmen praised him during meetings, only to secretly betray him afterward. He even experienced heartbreak. Several women claimed to love him. Later, he discovered they loved the lifestyle his wealth could provide. One painful memory still haunted him. 5 years earlier, he had planned to marry a woman named Sandra. She often spoke about true love. She promised to stand beside him forever. One evening, Ethan decided to test her. Instead of arriving in one of his luxury cars, he borrowed an old taxi and dressed in simple clothes. Sandra barely looked at him. "You came looking like this?" she asked with obvious disappointment. "I've been having financial problems," Ethan quietly replied. Her expression changed immediately. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I don't think we're meant for each other." 2 weeks later, she became engaged to another wealthy businessman. That experience broke something inside him. From then on, he questioned every smile, every compliment, every friendship. Who truly cared about Ethan, and who cared only about his billions? Those unanswered questions eventually led him to disappear. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Ethan," one of the senior servants called from outside. "Mrs. Lawson wants the garden finished before lunch." "I'm coming." He quickly hid the photograph inside the drawer and stepped outside. The bright morning air smelled of fresh flowers. Birds sang from nearby trees. It would have been peaceful, if not for the voices waiting ahead. "There he is," one of the security guards laughed. "Our hard-working gardener." Another guard tossed a rake onto the ground near Ethan. "Hurry up. The flowers won't trim themselves." Ethan simply picked up the rake. "Thank you." His calm response puzzled the guard. "Aren't you ever angry?" Ethan smiled. "Anger doesn't help flowers grow." The guards laughed as he walked away. By mid-morning, the blazing sun covered the entire garden. Sweat rolled down Ethan's face as he carefully trimmed a row of beautiful roses. Nearby, Patricia Lawson stood speaking to several wealthy guests. She proudly showed them around her estate. "My garden is the finest in Lagos," she boasted. One guest admired the colorful flowers. "They're absolutely beautiful." Patricia barely glanced at Ethan. "Of course they are. I pay people to keep everything perfect." Not once did she acknowledge the man whose hard work made the garden so beautiful. To her, he was simply another servant, another tool, another invisible worker. Ethan continued trimming quietly. Deep inside, however, he felt no bitterness. Instead, he remembered his father's final words before he passed away. "My son, never let success steal your humility, and never let another person's cruelty steal your kindness." Those words had become the foundation of his entire life. He had not come to the Lawson estate searching for revenge. He had come searching for truth. Could genuine kindness still exist in a world where people judged others by appearance? Could someone respect a poor gardener with nothing to offer? Or had wealth completely blinded people's hearts? As Ethan watered another bed of blooming lilies, he glanced toward the enormous mansion. Somewhere inside those expensive walls were people who believed money made them superior. They laughed at workers, ignored the struggling, looked down on anyone wearing old clothes. None of them realized that the quiet gardener they mocked could buy every mansion on their street without checking his bank balance. Yet Ethan never wanted them to admire him because he was rich. He wanted to know whether anyone would value him before discovering the truth. The answer, he feared, was becoming clearer with every passing day. Still, he refused to end the experiment, because somewhere beyond the insults, beyond the humiliation, and beyond the painful memories of his past, Ethan believed there had to be at least one genuine heart waiting to be found. He simply hadn't met that person yet. The Lawson estate was always beautiful. Every morning, the neatly trimmed hedges stood like green walls around the mansion. Colorful hibiscus flowers bloomed beside rows of roses, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air whenever a gentle breeze passed by. Guests often praised the beauty of the garden. They complimented Mrs. Patricia Lawson for maintaining such an elegant home. Not one of them ever asked who spent hours under the scorching sun making the garden look so perfect. That person was Ethan. By 7 o'clock every morning, his shirt was already soaked with sweat. Dirt covered his boots, and tiny scratches marked his hands from handling thorny roses and sharp gardening tools. Yet he never complained. As he carefully trimmed a flowering hedge near the front entrance, he noticed several servants whispering nearby. "Did you hear?" one of the cooks asked. "What happened?" Mrs. Lawson deducted 2 weeks' salary from one of the cleaners because she accidentally broke a flower vase. The other servant sighed. "That vase was already cracked." "Doesn't matter. Nobody argues with Madam." The workers quietly returned to their duties before Patricia could hear them. Ethan continued working in silence. The mansion looked luxurious, but many of the workers lived in constant fear. Every mistake carried a punishment. Every accident came with an insult. Kind words were rare. Later that morning, Ethan carried several bags of fertilizer across the large compound. Each bag was heavy, but he lifted them one after another without asking anyone for help. As he reached the back garden, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Excuse me." He turned around. Standing there was a young woman wearing a simple maid's uniform. She carried a tray with a glass of cold water and a neatly folded napkin. Her name tag read, Grace. She looked to be about 24 years old, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile that immediately made her stand out from everyone else in the mansion. "I noticed you've been working since morning," she said softly. "You should drink some water." Ethan looked surprised. "For me?" Grace nodded. "Yes. You've been outside for hours. No one should work this hard without resting." Ethan accepted the glass carefully. "Thank you." She smiled. "You're welcome." After drinking the water, Ethan handed the empty glass back. "I appreciate your kindness." Grace looked around quickly to make sure no one was watching. "If Madam sees me standing here too long, she'll think I'm wasting time." Ethan nodded. "You should go." She smiled once more before hurrying back toward the kitchen. Ethan watched her leave. It was such a small act. Just one glass of water. But it had been offered with genuine kindness. For the first time since arriving at the Lawson estate, someone had looked at him not as a servant, but as a fellow human being. That evening, Ethan sat alone behind the servants' quarters eating the usual leftovers. A few slices of stale bread and a small cup of tea that had already gone cold. He didn't mind. He had experienced much worse growing up. Just as he was about to finish eating, someone quietly approached. It was Grace. She carried a small covered container. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." She placed the container on the bench. "I made too much rice and stew. I thought you might like some." Ethan looked at the container. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." She smiled. "I wanted to." He slowly opened the lid. The aroma of freshly cooked jollof rice filled the air. There was a generous piece of chicken and vegetables carefully arranged on top. It wasn't leftover food. It was freshly prepared. "You should eat it while it's still warm," Grace said. Ethan looked at her. "Won't you get into trouble?" She shrugged. "Maybe. But I couldn't keep watching you survive on stale bread every day." Ethan's eyes softened. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Grace sat down on the other end of the bench. "My mother used to tell me something." "What did she say?" "She always said, never judge someone by what they wear. You don't know what battles they're fighting." Ethan smiled quietly. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. Grace's smile faded slightly. "We lost her 6 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Finally, Ethan asked, "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 3 years." "And do you like it?" Grace hesitated before answering. "I like honest work. But..." She looked toward the mansion. "Sometimes people forget we're human." Ethan understood exactly what she meant. She continued quietly. "My father became sick last year. I send almost all my salary home. My younger brother is still in school. So I can't afford to lose this job." Ethan listened carefully. Her words carried no self-pity, only quiet determination. "What about you?" Grace asked. "Do you have family?" Ethan paused. "I lost my parents years ago." "I'm sorry. They were good people." My father was a gardener too. Grace looked surprised. Really? He nodded. He taught me that no work is small. If you do your job with honesty, you should never be ashamed of it. Grace smiled. He was right. As they talked, Ethan realized something unusual. Grace never asked why he wore old clothes. She never questioned how much money he earned. She never looked down on him. She simply treated him with respect. The following afternoon, heavy dark clouds gathered over Lagos. Within minutes, rain poured across the estate. Servants rushed indoors. Garden furniture was quickly moved under shelter. Most workers stopped what they were doing, but Ethan remained outside. Strong winds threatened to destroy several newly planted flowers. Without hesitation, he carefully covered them with protective sheets. Mud splashed across his trousers. Rain soaked his shirt completely. Still, he continued working. Suddenly, someone appeared beside him holding a large umbrella. It was Grace. "You'll get sick," she said. "You should come inside." Ethan smiled. "If I leave now, these flowers will die." She looked at the fragile plants. Without saying another word, she knelt beside him. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "Helping you." She began holding the protective covers while Ethan secured them around the flowers. Rain continued falling heavily. Both of them were soaked. After several minutes, the last flower bed was safely protected. Ethan laughed softly. "You've ruined your uniform." Grace laughed too. "So have you." For a brief moment, they forgot about the mansion. Forgot about Patricia. Forgot about Vanessa. It felt like two ordinary people helping each other through a storm. When they finally stood up, Ethan looked at Grace with genuine gratitude. "No one has worried about me like this in a very long time." She smiled warmly. "Everyone deserves someone to care." Those simple words stayed with Ethan long after the rain had stopped. That evening, after changing into dry clothes, Ethan returned to his small room. He unlocked the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards and switched on the secure tablet. A message from Michael Daniels appeared immediately. "The board wants to know when you're coming back. Investors are asking questions." Ethan typed a short reply. "Not yet. The mission isn't over." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Have you finally found someone worth trusting?" Ethan stared at the screen for several moments before typing. "I may have found the first genuinely kind person." He closed the tablet and carefully hid it again. Then he sat quietly on the edge of his bed. His father's words echoed in his heart. "People will show you who they really are when they believe you have nothing to offer." For weeks, Ethan had witnessed pride, insults, and cruelty inside the Lawson estate. But today, something different had happened. One young maid had shared her food, offered him water, stood beside him in the rain. Not because she expected a reward, not because she knew his true identity, but simply because she believed kindness was the right thing to do. Outside his window, the garden glistened beneath the moonlight after the rain. The flowers stood taller, refreshed by the storm. Ethan smiled to himself. Perhaps people were like flowers. Some wilted under hardship. Others bloomed despite it. And for the first time since beginning his secret journey as a poor gardener, Ethan felt a quiet hope growing in his heart. Maybe his search for genuine kindness had finally begun to bear fruit. The Lawson estate had never looked more beautiful. For an entire week, dozens of workers hurried around the mansion preparing for the grand birthday celebration of Mrs. Patricia Lawson. Luxury cars arrived daily, bringing decorators, caterers, florists, musicians, and event planners. Expensive white tents were erected across the enormous garden. Crystal chandeliers were carefully hung beneath elegant canopies. Thousands of fresh flowers arrived from different parts of Nigeria, filling the air with their sweet fragrance. The celebration was expected to be one of the biggest social events in Lagos. Politicians, celebrities, business executives, and wealthy families had all received invitations. Patricia wanted everything to be perfect, and that meant Ethan had more work than ever before. Long before sunrise each morning, he was already trimming hedges, planting fresh flowers, polishing stone pathways, and watering every corner of the garden. He carried heavy bags of fertilizer on his shoulders, moved decorative plants from one location to another, and worked until long after darkness had covered the estate. Despite the exhausting work, he never complained. Whenever another worker became tired, Ethan quietly stepped in to help. If someone struggled to lift a heavy flower pot, he carried it without being asked. When one of the younger gardeners accidentally damaged a flower bed, Ethan patiently helped him repair it before anyone noticed. His kindness surprised the other workers. One afternoon, an elderly cleaner named Mama Bose wiped sweat from her forehead and watched Ethan lifting another large stone planter. "My son," she said, "aren't you tired?" Ethan smiled. "A little. You've been working since for this morning. The flowers still need attention." Mama Bose shook her head. "I've never seen anyone work as hard as you." Before Ethan could answer, a sharp voice echoed across the garden. "Ethan!" Mrs. Patricia Lawson stood near the entrance wearing an expensive cream-colored dress. She pointed angrily toward one section of the lawn. "Why are those flowers not blooming evenly?" Ethan walked over respectfully. "I'll replace the smaller ones this afternoon, ma'am. You should have done it yesterday." "I'm sorry, ma'am." Patricia folded her arms. "I don't pay people to apologize. I pay them to think." Several workers lowered their heads. No one dared speak. Patricia turned and walked away without another word. Mama Bose sighed quietly. "You didn't deserve that." Ethan simply picked up his gardening tools again. "It'll be all right." But deep inside, he felt the sting of humiliation. Not because Patricia had corrected him, but because she spoke to him as though he had no dignity. That evening, Grace found Ethan sitting alone behind the tool shed drinking water after finishing another 14-hour shift. "You look exhausted," she said. He smiled weakly. "I'll survive." She handed him a small cloth. "You've cut your hand." Ethan looked down. A thorn from one of the rose bushes had left a deep scratch across his palm. He hadn't even noticed. Grace carefully poured antiseptic onto the wound. "This might sting." "It already does," Ethan joked softly. She laughed. "You still find reasons to smile. My father used to say that smiling costs nothing." Grace gently wrapped a bandage around his hand. "There. Much better." Ethan looked at the neat bandage. "Thank you." She shrugged. "It's only a small wound." Ethan quietly thought to himself, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness heal the deepest pain. The day of Patricia's birthday finally arrived. By midday, the mansion looked like something from a fairy tale. Fresh flowers covered every table. Golden decorations sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Classical musicians welcomed guests as luxury vehicles lined the entrance. Men dressed in expensive suits stepped onto the red carpet beside elegantly dressed women wearing designer gowns and glittering jewelry. Camera flashes lit up the estate. Everyone wanted photographs with Patricia Lawson. She welcomed each guest with a bright smile. "My dear friend, you look wonderful. What an honor to have you here." Watching her greet guests so warmly, Ethan almost laughed. The woman who smiled so sweetly at wealthy visitors rarely showed even basic respect to the people who worked for her. As the party continued, Ethan quietly moved around the garden, making sure everything remained spotless. He swept fallen flower petals, refilled decorative fountains, adjusted flower arrangements, collected empty glasses left on tables. Most guests barely noticed him. To them, he was simply another servant. Then Vanessa arrived. She stepped out of a sleek black sports car wearing a dazzling silver dress that immediately attracted everyone's attention. Her friends surrounded her, laughing loudly as photographers took countless pictures. While walking through the garden, Vanessa suddenly spotted Ethan kneeling beside a flower bed. A mischievous smile spread across her face. "I've got an idea," she whispered to her friends. The group walked toward him. "Ethan," Vanessa called. He immediately stood. "Yes, miss?" She looked him up and down before turning to her friends. "Doesn't he look funny standing among all these expensive decorations?" Her friends laughed. "He almost looks like one of the garden statues." Vanessa clapped her hands. "Come, I want a picture." Before Ethan realized what was happening, Vanessa positioned herself beside him while one of her friends raised a phone. Everyone smile. Vanessa pointed dramatically at Ethan's dirty clothes. "Oh no!" she laughed loudly. "I forgot." "He probably doesn't know how to smile." The women burst into laughter as several nearby guests joined them. Ethan remained silent. "Smile," Vanessa mocked. "It won't hurt." He gave a small, polite smile. Instead of ending the joke, it encouraged them. One guest walked over carrying a plate filled with leftover cake. Looking directly at Ethan, the man smirked. "I think the gardener looks hungry." Without warning, he tipped the plate. Cake slid down Ethan's worn shirt before falling onto the grass. Laughter erupted around the garden. Someone else tossed a napkin at him. Another guest threw pieces of bread onto the ground near his feet. "Feed the gardener," one man shouted jokingly. More laughter followed. Standing nearby, Grace froze in disbelief. Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to run toward Ethan. She wanted to stop them. But before she could move, Patricia quietly stepped beside her. "Stay where you are," Patricia whispered coldly. Grace looked shocked. "But they're humiliating him." Patricia's expression hardened. "And if you interfere," she leaned closer, "you'll lose your job." Grace looked helplessly toward Ethan. He slowly bent down and began picking up the pieces of cake scattered across the lawn. One by one, without anger, without shouting, without defending himself. Guests continued laughing as though they were watching entertainment. Hidden behind decorative flower pots, tiny cameras silently recorded every second. Every cruel word, every burst of laughter, every face, everything was being saved. After cleaning the mess, Ethan quietly carried the rubbish away. As he walked toward the back of the garden, he heard Grace calling softly. "Ethan." He turned. "I'm so sorry. You don't have to apologize. I should have done something." "You wanted to." She lowered her head. "But I was afraid." Ethan nodded gently. "Fear makes people silent." Grace wiped away a tear. "I hate the way they treat you." For a brief moment, Ethan almost told her the truth. He almost revealed that he was not a poor gardener, that none of this humiliation could take away his wealth. But he stopped himself. If Grace learned who he really was now, the experiment would lose its meaning. Instead, he simply smiled. "Thank you for caring." As evening approached, fireworks exploded above the mansion. Guests applauded while music filled the air. Patricia proudly toasted her successful celebration. She believed the day had been perfect. She had no idea that beneath the glamorous decorations, every act of cruelty had been quietly documented. Much later that night, after the last guest had gone home and silence returned to the estate, Ethan sat alone in his small room. His dirty shirt still carried faint stains from the cake. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror. The humiliation had been painful, not because strangers had laughed at him, but because it reminded him of his father's words many years earlier. Some people believe another person's pain is entertainment. Never become one of them. Ethan carefully unlocked the hidden compartment beneath the floor. He switched on the secure tablet. A message from Michael Daniels appeared almost immediately. The cameras captured everything. "Would you like me to begin preparing legal action?" Ethan stared at the screen for several moments before replying. "Not yet. The truth is still unfolding." He placed the tablet back inside the hidden compartment and closed the floorboard. Then he looked out through the small window toward the magnificent garden glowing beneath the moonlight. The flowers still stood proudly despite being trampled by careless feet during the celebration. They had been bent, bruised, covered with dirt, yet they were still alive. Ethan quietly smiled. He felt very much like those flowers. No amount of mockery could destroy the values his parents had planted in his heart. The cruelty around him was growing worse with each passing day. But somewhere beneath the pride, the laughter, and the humiliation, he believed the moment of truth was drawing closer. And when that day finally arrived, the people who had treated a poor gardener as worthless would discover that the greatest measure of a person had never been the clothes they wore or the money they possessed, but the kindness they showed when they believed no reward would ever come. The Lawson estate slowly returned to its normal routine after Patricia Lawson's extravagant birthday celebration. The expensive tents were dismantled. The musicians packed their instruments. Luxury cars disappeared one after another. Fresh flower petals that had covered the garden were swept away until everything looked as though the party had never happened. Only one thing remained: the painful memory of how Ethan had been humiliated in front of hundreds of wealthy guests. Yet, just as before, Ethan woke before dawn. He quietly put on his faded brown shirt, tied his worn boots, picked up his gardening tools, and walked into the garden. His face carried the same calm expression. Anyone watching him would never guess that he had spent the previous night praying for the strength to forgive the people who had laughed at him. As the morning breeze moved through the flowers, Ethan carefully watered each plant. The roses had begun blooming again after the celebration. Their bright colors reminded him of something his father used to say: "Flowers never stop blooming because someone stepped on them. They simply bloom again." Those words gave Ethan the courage to keep moving forward. Around 8 o'clock, Grace arrived carrying a small basket of gardening gloves. She smiled when she saw him. "Good morning." "Good morning, Grace. I brought you a new pair of gloves." Ethan looked surprised. "You bought these?" She nodded. "I noticed yours are almost torn. You shouldn't have spent your money on me." Grace laughed softly. "It wasn't expensive. Besides, your hands deserve better." Ethan accepted the gloves with gratitude. "They're the nicest gift I've received in a long time." Grace smiled. "Then promise me you'll use them." "I promise." Before they could continue talking, Patricia's sharp voice echoed from the front porch. "Grace!" Grace immediately stepped back. "I'm coming, madam." She hurried into the mansion while Ethan quietly returned to trimming the hedges. Inside the house, Patricia stood in the living room speaking with Vanessa. The younger woman looked upset. "I can't find my diamond bracelet." Patricia frowned. "The one I bought in Dubai?" "Yes. I left it on my dressing table after the party. Now it's gone." The two women searched Vanessa's bedroom from top to bottom. They checked every drawer, every handbag, every jewelry box. Nothing. Vanessa crossed her arms. "One of the servants stole it." Patricia's face hardened. "No one leaves this house until it's found." Within minutes, every worker in the mansion had been ordered into the main hall. The cooks, the cleaners, the drivers, the gardeners, the security guards. Everyone stood nervously in a straight line. Patricia slowly walked in front of them. Her expensive heels echoed across the marble floor. "A valuable diamond bracelet has been stolen." Silence filled the room. "I will ask only once. Who took it?" Nobody answered. Patricia looked furious. "I see." She turned toward the head of security. "Search every room. And search every servant." The guards immediately began inspecting everyone's belongings. Small bags were emptied onto the floor. Lockers were opened. Mattresses were lifted. Workers stood quietly while strangers searched through their few personal possessions. Grace watched anxiously. "This isn't right," she whispered. Finally, the guards reached Ethan. "Your room." Ethan nodded calmly. "Go ahead." Several workers followed as the guards entered the tiny room behind the tool shed. The small space looked exactly as everyone expected. An old bed, a cracked mirror, a wooden chair, a few worn clothes folded neatly, a Bible resting on the table. The guards opened every drawer, checked beneath the mattress, looked inside every box. One guard even searched inside Ethan's gardening boots. Nothing. Another searched the small cupboard. Still nothing. After nearly 15 minutes, the head of security walked back into the hallway. "There's no bracelet." Patricia folded her arms. "Search again." The guards looked confused. "We already checked everything." "I said search again." They obeyed. This time they searched even more aggressively. Clothes were thrown onto the floor. The chair was knocked over. The mattress was ripped open. The small room Ethan had kept so clean was left in complete disorder. Still, the bracelet was nowhere to be found. The head of security sighed. He doesn't have it. Several workers quietly exchanged relieved glances. Surely the matter was over. But Patricia's pride refused to accept the truth. She walked directly toward Ethan. I still believe you took it. Ethan remained calm. I didn't. You expect me to believe that? Yes, ma'am. I have never stolen anything. Vanessa stepped forward. Poor people always lie. Grace could no longer remain silent. That's not true. Every eye turned toward her. Patricia slowly faced Grace. What did you say? Grace swallowed nervously. I said, Ethan wouldn't steal. You don't know that. I do. He's honest. Patricia laughed coldly. You've become very protective of the gardener. Grace lifted her chin. Because he's innocent. The room became completely silent. No servant had ever challenged Patricia Lawson like this before. Patricia's face turned red with anger. She walked up to Ethan until they were standing only inches apart. You embarrassed me. I didn't, ma'am. I believe you did. Then, without warning, she slapped him across the face. The loud sound echoed throughout the hallway. Everyone gasped. Grace covered her mouth in horror. Ethan's face turned slightly to one side from the force of the blow. A red mark slowly appeared on his cheek. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ethan slowly turned back to face Patricia. Instead of shouting, instead of raising his hand, he quietly said, I'm sorry you believe I disappointed you. His answer stunned everyone. Patricia had expected anger. Instead, she received calmness. It only made her even more furious. Vanessa stood nearby recording everything on her phone. She laughed while pointing the camera at Ethan. Look at him. He still won't fight back. Some of the security guards looked uncomfortable. One elderly driver lowered his head. Mama Bose quietly wiped tears from her eyes. The humiliation had gone too far. At that exact moment, a young housekeeper rushed downstairs holding something in her hand. Madam! Everyone turned toward her. I found the bracelet. Patricia frowned. Where? It was inside Miss Vanessa's makeup bag. The hallway became silent. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. My makeup bag? Yes, miss. It must have slipped inside after the party. The young housekeeper carefully handed the sparkling bracelet to Patricia. There it was, exactly where Vanessa had accidentally left it. The accusation had been false. Every servant looked toward Ethan. Surely Patricia would apologize. Instead, she looked away. Everyone returned to work. That was all she said. No apology. No regret. Nothing. Ethan quietly nodded. Yes, ma'am. He bent down and calmly gathered his belongings from the floor. He picked up his Bible, folded his clothes, placed the broken chair against the wall. Not once did he complain. Grace walked into the room behind him. Tears streamed down her face. I'm so sorry. Ethan smiled gently. You have nothing to apologize for. They treated you like a criminal. I know. They slapped you. I know. They never even said sorry. Ethan looked around the damaged room. Sometimes people find it easier to protect their pride than admit they were wrong. Grace shook her head. You deserve so much better than this. Ethan looked at her quietly. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. That afternoon, the servants whispered about what had happened. I've worked here for 15 years, the head gardener said quietly. I've never seen Madam accuse someone without proof. Mama Bose sighed. And after the bracelet was found, she still couldn't apologize. The workers slowly returned to their duties, but the atmosphere around the estate had changed. Many of them had always feared Patricia. Now, they had begun losing respect for her. Late that evening, after everyone had gone inside, Ethan returned to his small room. He carefully closed the door. Then he knelt beside the loose floorboard. He unlocked the hidden compartment and removed the secure tablet. A new message from Michael Daniels appeared. The cameras captured everything. The search, the accusation, the slap, the discovery of the bracelet. This evidence alone could destroy Patricia Lawson's public image. Ethan remained silent for a long moment before typing a reply. Continue saving every recording. Another message appeared. Sir, are you all right? Ethan looked at the reflection of the red mark still visible on his cheek. Slowly he typed, my face will heal. What concerns me more is how easily people can wound another person's dignity. He locked the tablet away and sat quietly on the edge of his bed. Outside, the moonlight shone over the beautiful garden he had cared for every day. The flowers bloomed peacefully, untouched by the hatred inside the mansion. Ethan closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Father, help me remain the man you raised me to be. He knew the greatest test of his life was no longer about hiding his wealth. It was about protecting his heart from becoming bitter. And although Patricia and Vanessa believed they had broken the spirit of a poor gardener, they had no idea that the quiet man they had falsely accused was patiently waiting for the day when the truth would bloom just as beautifully as the flowers he cared for every morning. The morning after the false accusation, Ethan stood quietly outside the Lawson estate with only a small travel bag resting beside his feet. The sky was gray, and a cool breeze rustled the trees lining the long driveway. The beautiful gardens he had spent months caring for looked greener than ever, but this time he was not there to water the flowers or trim the hedges. His time at the mansion had come to an end. Patricia Lawson had decided that although the bracelet had been found in Vanessa's makeup bag, she no longer wanted Ethan working on her property. You make everyone uncomfortable, she had said coldly. It is better if you leave. There had been no apology, no compensation, not even a simple thank you for the months he had worked tirelessly to make her estate beautiful. Ethan simply nodded. As you wish, ma'am. He carried his small bag out of the servants' quarters without looking back. As he reached the gate, the elderly security guard who had once laughed at him stepped forward. Ethan. Ethan stopped. The old man looked ashamed. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Ethan smiled gently. For what? For believing the worst about you. I should have spoken up yesterday. Ethan placed a hand on the man's shoulder. The important thing is that you know the truth now. The guard lowered his head. You are a better man than most people I've met. Ethan thanked him before continuing toward the road. A few minutes later, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Ethan. He turned around. Grace was running toward him, carrying a small backpack and struggling to catch her breath. You left without saying goodbye. I didn't want to cause you more trouble. She smiled sadly. It doesn't matter now. What do you mean? Grace took a deep breath. Mrs. Lawson fired me. Ethan's eyes widened. She fired you? Grace nodded. She said I was becoming too loyal to the gardener instead of my employer. I'm so sorry. Grace shrugged, though tears filled her eyes. I knew this might happen the moment I defended you. You shouldn't have lost your job because of me. She looked directly into his eyes. I don't regret it. Some things are worth standing for. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Cars passed along the road while the magnificent Lawson estate stood silently behind them. Grace broke the silence. So, what do we do now? Ethan smiled. I suppose we begin again. Together they walked away from the mansion without knowing exactly where life would lead them next. By afternoon, they found a small room for rent in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Lagos. It was nothing like the luxurious mansion they had left behind. The building was old. The walls were faded. The roof creaked whenever the wind blew. Their tiny room contained only a narrow bed, a small table, 2 plastic chairs, and a single window overlooking a dusty street. The landlord apologized. It isn't much. Grace smiled politely. It's enough. After paying 1 month's rent with the little money Ethan carried as part of his disguise, they moved in. Grace looked around the room. I've lived in smaller places. Ethan laughed softly. So have I. She looked surprised. I thought you said your father was a gardener. He was. We didn't have much. Grace nodded. I understand. That evening, they bought simple food from a nearby roadside food stall. 2 plates of rice and beans. A bottle of water. Nothing fancy. As they ate together, Grace noticed Ethan seemed unusually peaceful. You don't seem worried. He smiled. Worrying doesn't change tomorrow. She laughed. I wish I could think like that. You will. She looked at him carefully. You know. You never complain. Even after everything that happened. Ethan thought for a moment. My father taught me something. What? He said bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. Grace smiled. He sounds like he was a wonderful man. He was. That night, after Grace fell asleep, Ethan quietly stepped outside. The narrow street was almost empty. He walked a short distance before taking the secure satellite phone from his pocket. Within seconds, Michael Daniels answered. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Michael. I heard they dismissed you. They did. Should I begin the next phase? Ethan looked back toward the small apartment. Not yet. Are you certain? The experiment isn't finished. Michael hesitated. The board members are becoming restless. Several investors are demanding your return. They'll have to wait. Michael sighed. Very well. There is something else. What is it? Someone has been quietly purchasing shares in companies connected to Patricia Lawson. Ethan frowned. Who? We're still investigating. Keep watching. Yes, sir. After ending the call, Ethan carefully hid the satellite phone inside his jacket before returning to the apartment. Grace never knew he had left. The next morning, Grace began searching for another job. She visited restaurants, hotels, cleaning agencies, small businesses. Everywhere she went, she received the same answer. We're not hiring. I'm sorry. Maybe next month. By evening, she returned home looking exhausted. No luck. She shook her head. I'll try again tomorrow. Ethan handed her a cup of tea. You will find something. I hope so. She looked embarrassed. I don't like depending on anyone. You're not. We're helping each other. She smiled gratefully. The following days settled into a simple routine. Every morning Grace searched for work. Meanwhile, Ethan accepted small gardening jobs around the neighborhood to maintain his disguise. He trimmed hedges for elderly couples, planted flowers for local shop owners, repaired broken fences. People appreciated his honesty and hard work. Although the jobs paid very little, Ethan treated each one with the same care he once gave to Billionaire landscaping projects. Word slowly spread through the neighborhood. If you need a gardener, people said, call Ethan. One afternoon, an elderly widow invited him to restore her neglected garden. When he finished, colorful flowers surrounded her tiny house. She smiled through tears. My late husband planted these years ago. I thought I'd never see them bloom again. Ethan smiled. Sometimes all they need is someone willing to care. She pressed a small payment into his hand. It isn't much. It's more than enough. Watching from across the street, Grace admired him. Later she asked, You could have finished that job quickly. Instead you stayed for hours. Why? Ethan smiled. Because she wasn't paying me for speed. She was trusting me with something precious. Grace nodded thoughtfully. You really love what you do. I do. A week later, something unusual happened. As Grace returned from another unsuccessful job search, she noticed a sleek black luxury car parked quietly near their apartment building. Two men wearing expensive suits stepped out. They looked around carefully before approaching Ethan. Grace quickly stopped behind a nearby shop, curious but unnoticed. One of the men spoke respectfully. Good afternoon, sir. Grace frowned. Sir? The man handed Ethan a sealed envelope. Ethan accepted it calmly. Thank you. The visitors bowed slightly before returning to the car and driving away. Grace watched the entire exchange with confusion. When Ethan walked back inside, she asked casually, Did someone come looking for you? He nodded. Just an old acquaintance. What did they want? Business. She looked puzzled. I thought you were only a gardener. He smiled gently. I've met many people over the years. Grace accepted the answer, though something about it didn't quite make sense. Over the following days, similar incidents happened again. A luxury SUV stopped briefly outside their apartment. Another well-dressed visitor delivered documents. Sometimes expensive cars slowed down, and the drivers greeted Ethan with unusual respect before quietly leaving. The neighbors began whispering, "Who is that gardener? Why do wealthy people keep visiting him?" Grace found herself wondering the same thing. One evening, unable to hide her curiosity any longer, she asked, "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Who are you really?" Ethan looked out the window at the setting sun. For several moments he said nothing. Finally he smiled. "I promise. When the time is right, I'll tell you everything." Grace studied his face. There was sadness in his eyes, but there was also honesty. She smiled softly. "I'll wait." As darkness settled over the quiet neighborhood, Ethan realized his carefully constructed disguise was becoming harder to maintain. The truth was slowly drawing closer. And somewhere in Lagos, events were already unfolding that would soon force the poor gardener to step out of the shadows and reveal the identity that would leave everyone who had mocked him speechless. It had been nearly 3 months since Ethan quietly walked out of the Lawson estate with nothing but a small travel bag and the clothes on his back. To Patricia Lawson, he was nothing more than a gardener she had fired. To Vanessa, he was the poor man she had laughed at and humiliated. To the rest of Lagos, Ethan Cole was still the billionaire who had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. No one knew that those 3 people were the same man. Early one Monday morning, the headquarters of Cole Group became the center of attention across Nigeria. The towering glass building stood proudly in Victoria Island, surrounded by television vans, luxury cars, and hundreds of journalists waiting outside the entrance. For weeks, rumors had spread that the company's mysterious founder was finally returning. No one knew if the rumors were true. Inside the massive conference hall, hundreds of business executives, investors, politicians, and international partners filled every seat. Elegant chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors. Large digital screens displayed the Cole Group logo, while employees moved quickly to ensure everything was perfect. The atmosphere was filled with excitement. Everyone wanted to witness history. Among the invited guests were Patricia Lawson and her daughter Vanessa. Patricia adjusted her expensive navy blue designer suit as she admired the luxurious surroundings. "I've heard today's announcement could change the entire business community," she said confidently. Vanessa smiled. "I hope we finally get to meet Ethan Cole." Patricia nodded. "If we can secure a partnership with Cole Group, our business will expand across Africa." Vanessa looked around the magnificent hall. "They say Ethan Cole is one of the richest men in the world." Patricia laughed softly. "I've always wanted to meet someone at that level." Neither of them realized that they already had. Several rows behind them, Grace quietly entered the conference hall. She looked completely out of place among the wealthy guests. Just 2 days earlier, she had received an elegant invitation delivered to the small apartment she shared with Ethan. The envelope contained only a short message. "Please attend today's Cole Group shareholders meeting as my special guest." There was no signature. Grace had immediately recognized the handwriting. It belonged to Ethan. She still didn't understand why he wanted her there. When she asked him the previous evening where he would be sitting, he had simply smiled. "You'll see." Now, as she looked around the enormous hall, she couldn't find him anywhere. She checked every row, every entrance, every stage. There was no sign of the quiet gardener. A few minutes later, Michael Daniels, Cole Group's chief legal advisor, walked onto the stage. The room immediately became silent. He smiled warmly at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, respected investors, members of the press, thank you for joining us today." He paused for a moment. "For the past several months, many of you have asked one question. Where is Ethan Cole?" The audience leaned forward. Michael continued, "Today, you will receive your answer." Excitement spread throughout the hall. Television cameras focused on the large double doors at the back of the auditorium. The lights dimmed. Soft orchestral music filled the room. Then, the doors slowly opened. Everyone turned. A tall, handsome black African man walked confidently into the hall. He wore a perfectly tailored black Italian suit, a crisp white shirt, a dark silk tie, and polished leather shoes that reflected the lights above. An elegant silver watch rested on his wrist. His posture radiated quiet confidence. His face looked familiar, very familiar. Patricia frowned. Vanessa blinked repeatedly. "No," Vanessa whispered. "That can't be." The man continued walking toward the stage, greeting several international executives who welcomed him with warm smiles and respectful handshakes. Board members stood as he passed. Senior government officials nodded respectfully. Foreign investors applauded. Grace's eyes widened. Her heart pounded. It was Ethan, the gardener. But he no longer wore torn clothes stained with soil. The faded cap was gone. The worn boots had been replaced by polished designer shoes. The humble gardener had completely disappeared. Standing before the world was a billionaire. Michael Daniels smiled proudly. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my greatest honor to welcome the founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Cole Group, Mr. Ethan Cole." The entire conference hall erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet. Television cameras flashed nonstop. Journalists shouted questions. Patricia felt her legs weaken. She grabbed the armrest of her chair for support. This is impossible." Vanessa stared at Ethan with tears already forming in her eyes. "The gardener." Her voice trembled. The gardener was Ethan Cole? Neither of them could believe what they were seeing. Grace remained frozen in her seat. Every conversation she had shared with Ethan replayed in her mind. The simple meals, the small apartment, the gardening jobs, the rainy afternoon when they protected flowers together. His calmness, his kindness, everything suddenly made sense. Ethan reached the podium and smiled at the audience. "Good morning, everyone." His deep, calm voice echoed throughout the hall. "Thank you for your patience during my absence. I know many people have wondered where I have been." He paused briefly. "I wasn't on vacation. I wasn't recovering from illness. I wasn't hiding from business. I was learning." The audience listened in complete silence. "For the past several months, I lived as an ordinary gardener." Gasps spread across the conference hall. "I wore old clothes. I earned a small salary. I experienced the life of those society often ignores." He looked across the audience. "I wanted to discover something. How do people treat someone they believe has nothing?" Patricia slowly lowered her head. She already knew where this was going. Ethan continued. "I met wonderful people. I also met people who believed money determined human value." His eyes briefly rested on Patricia and Vanessa. Neither woman could look at him. "I was insulted. I was mocked. I was falsely accused. I was publicly humiliated." The room became painfully quiet. Many guests exchanged confused glances. Reporters quickly scribbled notes. Business executives looked toward Patricia, beginning to realize she was connected to the story. Ethan spoke calmly. "But I also met someone whose kindness never depended on wealth." He turned toward the audience. "Grace." Grace looked around in surprise. "Would you please come forward?" Her hands trembled. Slowly, she stood and walked toward the stage. Thousands of eyes followed her. When she reached Ethan, he smiled warmly. "This young woman believed I was nothing more than a poor gardener. She shared her food. She gave me water when I was thirsty. She stood beside me when everyone else walked away. She defended me when doing so cost her job." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I only did what anyone should do." Ethan gently shook his head. "No, you did what very few people are willing to do." The audience erupted into applause once again. Many people stood to honor Grace. Even seasoned executives wiped tears from their eyes. Patricia could no longer hold back her emotions. Tears streamed down her face as she remembered every cruel word she had spoken. Every insult, every accusation, every order. Vanessa buried her face in her hands. She remembered pouring water on Ethan, laughing while guests threw food at him, recording his humiliation. She wished she could erase those memories forever. But it was too late. The truth had finally come into the light. The poor gardener they had treated as worthless was not only one of the wealthiest men in Africa. He was also the most dignified person they had ever met. As Ethan looked across the silent conference hall, he realized his experiment had finally reached its end. The disguise was over. The truth had been revealed. And from that moment onward, the lives of everyone inside that room would never be the same again. The applause that had filled the conference hall slowly faded into complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Hundreds of guests sat frozen in their seats, trying to process the unbelievable revelation they had just witnessed. The poor gardener they had ignored, mocked, and humiliated was standing before them as Ethan Cole, the billionaire founder and chairman of Cole Group. Television cameras remained fixed on the stage. Journalists continued recording every second. Across the country, millions of people watching the live broadcast stared at their television screens in disbelief. Patricia Lawson felt as though the floor beneath her had disappeared. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the whispers spreading through the audience. "That's the gardener. I recognize him." Didn't Patricia Lawson publicly praise her staff during interviews? So this is how she really treats them? Vanessa sat beside her mother with tears streaming down her face. For the first time in her life, she wished she could disappear. She remembered every cruel joke, every insult, every burst of laughter, every moment she had treated Ethan as though he had no value. Those memories now felt like heavy stones pressing against her heart. On the stage, Ethan remained calm. There was no anger on his face, no smile of victory, only quiet sadness. He looked around the hall before speaking again. "When I began this journey," he said, "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I wasn't searching for revenge. I simply wanted to answer one question." He paused. "Does kindness still exist when there is nothing to gain?" The audience listened carefully. "My father was a gardener. He spent his entire life caring for gardens that belonged to other people. He worked with honesty. He respected everyone. But many people treated him as though he was invisible." Ethan looked toward the audience. "I promised myself that if I ever became successful, I would never forget where I came from." He turned toward one of the large screens behind him. Michael Daniels nodded to the technical team. The lights dimmed. A video began to play. The first recording showed Ethan quietly trimming roses in the Lawson estate. Guests watched as Vanessa and her wealthy friends surrounded him. The hall became silent. Everyone saw Vanessa deliberately snapping freshly blooming roses from the bushes before laughing. The video continued. Another clip showed one of her friends tipping Ethan's watering can over, soaking him with water while everyone laughed. Soft murmurs spread across the audience. Then came another recording. Guests watched Patricia shouting at Ethan over a single leaf that had fallen onto the walkway. Although the mistake had been insignificant, Patricia spoke to him with complete disrespect. Several executives shook their heads. "This is unbelievable," one whispered. The next video was even more painful. It showed the birthday celebration. Vanessa stood beside Ethan while guests laughed at his worn clothes. Then one man deliberately emptied leftover cake onto Ethan's shirt. Another threw pieces of bread toward him. Others laughed as though his humiliation was entertainment. The room grew painfully quiet. Some people lowered their eyes. Others watched in shock. Then came the most heartbreaking recording of all. The search for the missing bracelet. Security guards entered Ethan's tiny room. They threw his clothes onto the floor. They ripped open his mattress. They searched every corner while Patricia stood outside watching. The video clearly showed Ethan remaining calm throughout the entire search. Then, the sound of the slap echoed through the conference hall. Many people gasped. Patricia herself covered her face as everyone watched her strike Ethan across the cheek. Moments later, another servant appeared holding Vanessa's bracelet. The recording proved beyond any doubt that Ethan had been innocent from the beginning. Yet Patricia had never apologized. When the video ended, silence filled the room once again. No one applauded. No one spoke. The evidence had spoken for itself. Michael Daniels walked back to the podium. "As many of you now understand," he said, Every event shown today was recorded as part of Mr. Cole's social experiment. The purpose was never to trap anyone. It was to observe how people treat those they believe have no influence, no wealth, and no power. Patricia slowly stood from her seat. Every camera immediately turned toward her. She walked unsteadily toward the stage. Her confident posture was gone. The proud socialite who had always believed she was better than everyone else now looked like a broken woman. When she reached Ethan, tears flowed freely down her face. I'm so sorry. Her voice trembled. I judged you by your clothes. I looked down on you. I treated you terribly. She lowered her head. I have no excuse. For several moments, Ethan simply looked at her. Then Patricia did something no one expected. She knelt. The entire conference hall gasped. One of Lagos' most respected socialites knelt before the gardener she had once treated as worthless. Please forgive me, she whispered. I was blinded by pride. Vanessa hurried onto the stage moments later. She could barely speak through her tears. I'm ashamed of myself. I laughed at you. I humiliated you. I thought money made me important. She wiped her eyes. But today I realize, it only revealed how empty my heart had become. Grace stood quietly beside Ethan. She could see genuine regret in both women. Whether it had come too late, only time would tell. Ethan finally spoke. I accept your apology. Patricia looked up hopefully. But forgiveness, Ethan continued gently, does not erase consequences. She nodded slowly. I understand. You spent years building a reputation through charity events and public speeches. He looked around the room. But true character is revealed by how we treat people who can do nothing for us. His words echoed throughout the hall. Many people quietly reflected on their own lives. How had they treated waiters, drivers, cleaners, gardeners, security guards? Were they any different? Ethan turned toward Grace and smiled warmly. During this journey, I met hundreds of people. Some saw only an old shirt and dirty boots. But one person saw a human being. He gently took Grace's hand. She offered me food when she thought I was hungry. She gave me water when she believed I was thirsty. She defended me when everyone else remained silent. Grace lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention. I wasn't trying to be special. I simply believed it was the right thing to do. Ethan smiled. And that is exactly what makes you special. The audience rose to its feet once more. This applause sounded different from the earlier one. It was not applause for wealth. It was applause for compassion. It honored a young woman whose kindness expected nothing in return. As the sound filled the conference hall, Ethan looked across the crowd. His experiment had answered the question that had troubled him for years. Yes, kindness still existed. It was rare. It was often quiet. It usually came from those with the least to give. But it was real. And in the end, it had proven to be far more valuable than all the billions he had ever earned. The emotional applause inside the conference hall continued for several minutes. Many of the guests remained standing, not because they were honoring Ethan's wealth, but because they had witnessed something far greater. They had seen kindness rewarded. When the applause finally faded, Ethan stepped toward the microphone once again. His voice remained calm and humble. I have spent many years building businesses, he said. But today, I want to build something even more important. The audience listened attentively. I have learned that many hardworking people are ignored simply because of the jobs they do. Gardeners, cleaners, drivers, cooks, security guards, and domestic workers help keep our homes and businesses running. Yet they are often treated as though they are invisible. He paused before continuing. That must change. A large screen behind him lit up with the words, "The Cole Foundation for Dignity and Hope." The audience exchanged curious glances. Ethan smiled. This foundation will provide scholarships for the children of low-income workers, medical assistance for struggling families, housing support for elderly employees, and business grants for honest people trying to improve their lives. The hall erupted into applause once again. Many people wiped away tears. The announcement quickly became the biggest business and humanitarian story in the country. Ethan then turned toward Grace. Grace. She stepped closer. I have another announcement. Grace looked confused. Ethan? He smiled warmly. Throughout this journey, you proved something that no amount of money can buy. You proved that your heart remains kind even when no one is watching. She lowered her eyes. I only treated you the way everyone deserves to be treated. Exactly, Ethan replied. That is why I want you to become the executive director of the Cole Foundation. Grace stared at him in complete shock. The audience gasped. Me? She whispered. Yes. I've never managed a foundation. You've never worked in an office like this. I don't even have experience. Ethan smiled gently. Skills can be taught. Integrity cannot. The room broke into applause once more. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Just continue being the person you already are. She nodded slowly. I'll do my very best. Ethan shook her hand as photographers captured the unforgettable moment. At that same moment, Patricia and Vanessa remained seated quietly in the front row. Neither woman had spoken since apologizing. The weight of their actions had become painfully real. Patricia looked around the conference hall. People who once eagerly greeted her were now avoiding eye contact. Several executives quietly walked past without acknowledging her. Business partners who had once praised her suddenly seemed distant. Her carefully built reputation had begun to crumble. After the event ended, Patricia approached several executives she had hoped to meet. One politely smiled. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lawson. Our company has decided not to proceed with further discussions. Another businessman offered a respectful nod. We believe our corporate values no longer align. One after another, the responses were the same. Nobody shouted. Nobody insulted her. But everyone quietly walked away. Patricia finally understood something Ethan had known for years. A damaged reputation was far more difficult to rebuild than a damaged business. Nearby, Vanessa sat alone on a bench outside the conference center. She stared at the ground, unable to stop crying. For the first time in her life, she saw herself honestly. She remembered pouring water on Ethan, laughing while guests threw food at him, mocking his clothes, recording his humiliation. None of those memories made her laugh anymore. Instead, they filled her with deep regret. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. May I sit here? Vanessa looked up. It was Grace. She nodded quietly. Grace sat beside her without saying anything for a moment. Finally, Vanessa spoke. I don't expect anyone to forgive me. Grace looked at her kindly. People can change. I hope so. I don't like the person I used to be. Grace smiled softly. Then don't be that person anymore. Vanessa wiped away her tears. Do you really believe someone like me can become better? I do. But it starts with your next decision, not your last mistake. Those simple words settled deeply into Vanessa's heart. Across the courtyard, Ethan watched the conversation from a distance. Michael Daniels walked over to him. Sir, the board members are waiting. Ethan nodded. I'll be there shortly. Michael glanced toward Grace and Vanessa. You always believed kindness could change people. Ethan smiled. I still do. But not everyone chooses to change. And if they do, then their past becomes a lesson instead of a life sentence. Michael smiled respectfully. You sound just like your father. Ethan looked toward the bright afternoon sky. I think he'd be proud today. Later that evening, news of the conference spread across Nigeria and beyond. Television stations replayed the shocking revelation. Newspapers carried headlines about the billionaire who disguised himself as a poor gardener. Social media was flooded with discussions. But among all the stories, one photograph touched millions of hearts the most. It wasn't a picture of Ethan standing beside powerful business leaders. It wasn't a picture of the luxurious conference hall. It was a simple photograph of Ethan shaking Grace's hand while both smiled through tears. The caption beneath the image read, Kindness is never wasted. It always finds its reward. As the sun slowly set over Lagos, Ethan stood outside the Cole Group headquarters and looked across the city. He had started his journey searching for genuine hearts. He had endured insults, false accusations, and humiliation. Yet, in the middle of all the pain, he had found something priceless. Proof that true kindness still existed. And he knew that the greatest reward was not the success of his experiment. It was finding people like Grace, people who chose compassion when they believed no reward would ever come. 6 months passed after the truth about Ethan Cole's secret identity shocked the entire country. Life had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The story of the billionaire who disguised himself as a poor gardener had become an inspiration across Nigeria. Schools discussed it during assemblies. Churches used it in sermons about humility. Companies organized workshops to teach employees the importance of treating every worker with dignity and respect. But for Ethan, fame was never the goal. He quietly returned to doing what he loved most, helping people. One bright Saturday morning, Ethan stood in a beautiful public botanical garden in Lagos. The land had once been abandoned and overgrown with weeds, but through the Cole Foundation, it had been transformed into a peaceful park filled with colorful flowers, green lawns, walking paths, and shady trees. Children laughed as they chased butterflies across the grass. Families enjoyed picnics beneath the trees. Elderly couples sat on wooden benches enjoying the fresh air. Near the entrance stood a bronze statue of an ordinary gardener holding a watering can. There was no expensive suit, no luxury watch, no symbol of wealth. Only a hardworking gardener with a gentle smile. At the base of the statue were simple words engraved into the stone. True greatness is measured by how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Visitors stopped to read the message every day. Many left quietly, reflecting on their own lives. Ethan smiled as he watched a group of young gardeners from the foundation planting fresh flowers beside the pathway. Every one of them earned fair wages. They received health insurance. Their children attended school through scholarships provided by the Cole Foundation. Many had once struggled to survive. Now they worked with pride. Grace walked toward Ethan carrying a folder of reports. She looked confident in her new role as executive director of the Cole Foundation. The shy maid who had once served food in the Lawson mansion had become a respected leader admired by thousands. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "Good morning, Grace." She handed him the folder. "Our new education program has awarded scholarships to 500 children this year." Ethan smiled. "That's wonderful. And the housing project? The first 50 families will receive the keys to their new homes next month." Ethan closed the folder. "This is exactly why the foundation exists." Grace nodded. "People's lives are changing. And it's because you chose kindness instead of revenge." Ethan looked across the garden. Revenge might satisfy anger for a moment, but kindness can change generations. Grace smiled. "I've learned so much from you." Ethan laughed softly. "I learned it from my father." Not far away, another familiar face slowly approached. It was Patricia Lawson. She looked very different from the proud woman who had once ruled her mansion with arrogance. Her expensive designer clothes had been replaced by a simple dress. The confidence that had once appeared as pride had become quiet humility. She stopped a few steps away. "Ethan." He turned and smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Lawson." She lowered her head. "I wanted to thank you." "There is no need." "There is." She took a deep breath. "After everything that happened, I lost many business opportunities. I also lost something much more important. My pride." She looked at the gardeners working nearby. "For the first time in my life, I truly began seeing people. I started speaking to my employees with respect. I apologized to every worker who remained with me. My house feels different now. There is peace." Ethan smiled warmly. "Then you gained something far more valuable than money." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one." Ethan gently shook his head. "No, you chose to change. That decision belonged to you." Before leaving, Patricia extended her hand. Ethan shook it with a smile. As she walked away, Grace quietly said, "I never imagined she could change so much." "Neither did I," Ethan replied. But people often surprise us. A few moments later, another visitor entered the garden. Vanessa. She was carrying several boxes filled with gardening gloves, boots, and tools. She smiled nervously. "I brought supplies for today's volunteers." Grace greeted her warmly. "Thank you." Over the past several months, Vanessa had volunteered at the foundation every weekend. She spent time planting flowers, serving meals to homeless families, and mentoring young girls. She never asked photographers to follow her. She never posted her charity work online. She simply served quietly. One little girl walked up to Vanessa holding a tiny flower. "Thank you for helping us." Vanessa knelt and accepted the flower with tears in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me another chance." Watching from a distance, Ethan smiled. The transformation was genuine. His experiment had changed more than one life. As the afternoon sun painted the garden with golden light, Ethan picked up a watering can and began watering a row of newly planted roses. Several children watched curiously. One little boy asked, "Sir, weren't you the billionaire on television?" Ethan chuckled. "Yes." The boy looked confused. "Then why are you watering flowers yourself?" Ethan knelt beside him and smiled. "Because no honest work is beneath anyone. The title you have doesn't make you great. The way you treat people does." The little boy smiled and eagerly picked up a smaller watering can. "Can I help?" "Of course." Together they watered the flowers as the other children joined in. Grace watched the scene with a warm smile. The man who had once been mocked for carrying a watering can was now inspiring a new generation through the very same work. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the trees, Ethan looked across the blooming garden. Months earlier, people had laughed at a poor gardener because they believed he had nothing. If only they had known he was a billionaire, they would have treated him differently. But that was the lesson. Respect should never depend on wealth. Kindness should never depend on status. And the true value of a person can never be measured by the clothes they wear, the job they do, or the size of their bank account. Some of the richest hearts in the world wear the simplest clothes. And sometimes the greatest billionaire is the quiet gardener everyone overlooks. The end. If the story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Thank you for watching.